You may not consider yourself one for conspiracy theories. You easily tackle misinformation online, and extremism is something you only hear about on the news. But the impact of these developments is much closer than you think. Social media algorithms, which most of us use on a daily basis, are designed to create revenue. Given that heightened emotions on social media platforms often lead to increased engagement and subsequently more revenue, they wield significant influence over what we encounter. This growing phenomenon is having a direct impact on the perceptions of democratic institutions and trust in science. At worst, it has the ability to attempt to overthrow or disrupt democratically elected governments. Extreme political narratives have been rising across Europe, and these narratives influence mainstream political discourses and policies. It's about you, me, and the lives we lead. As a generation born in a time before the internet, there was a growing concern for those in the middle age. Not being digital natives, this group often still used traditional routes to gain information, such as print media, TV, and radio, but at the same time are engaging in online media. Without the tools to navigate, they rely on their perception of credible sources, making them easy targets for extremist narratives and misinformation through social media. This group of middle-aged adults between the ages of 45 and 65 is under-researched, but the impact of them being drawn into extremist content may have significant consequences on political discourse, democratic processes, and institutions, as they form a large group of people who may also be in decision-making positions, such as managers and policymakers, therefore have a direct influence on those who live in democracies like you and me. In this podcast, we will talk with experts in the field of research surrounding conspiracy theories and misinformation, joining both strength and knowledge in the newly founded SMIDGE Project. Research centres, universities and NGOs from all over Europe will shine their light on new research findings and counter-narratives, education and also training resources that are being developed to address fake news and misinformation. Dear all, a very warm welcome to another episode of the Smidgecast. I am Ella Putt, your host, and as said in the introduction of this episode, I will talk with experts about the SMIDGE Project, which is a project that brings researchers from all over Europe together in the quest for a counter-narrative to extremist messaging on social media. Joining us from Leicester, UK is Sara Wilford from the Montfort University. Sara, it's a pleasure to have you here as a guest today. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, glad to have you here as well. You and your colleagues at DMU are the key architects of the SMIDGE Project. Now, could you please tell us a bit more about yourselves and your tasks in this project?
Okay, so Montfort University was actually the initiators of the project and the project idea. This was an idea that I'd had for a couple of years prior to that. I'd been working on other project proposals and other things, and I felt that this gap of the middle age, the 45 to 65 age group, was seriously just never considered. So we got together as a team and thought, okay, this is something that's really quite important. This is a huge gap in the knowledge. And so we thought it was really important to write a proposal and to actually do a project that examined all of these issues, but to focus on this 45 to 65 age group that is almost completely ignored.
Yeah, we will come to talk a little bit more about this ignored age group and how you research that in this project. In a field with so much research endeavors on extremism and disinformation, what sets this project apart? Is it that particular age group that you focus on?
Well, largely, yes, but also there was another element to it, and that is the fact that, okay, we do have a situation where people are vulnerable to misinformation. And there's a variety of different psychological and demographic and social reasons for that. But what we also realised quite quickly was that this particular generation are also the ones making the policy decisions. These are the people that are making decisions about what happens to the rest of us. They are the bosses. They are the gatekeepers. They are the people who are actually providing funding for research or perhaps trying to do preventative measures. And yet they are just as vulnerable to that misinformation. So it's actually really, really serious. Because what you have are the decision makers who are being influenced by misinformation, that means that it's automatically going to be a problem with those decisions. Yeah, this is something we're trying to look at and trying to address.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I thought was so interesting is that researching online extremism and conspiracy theories, misinformation online, we tend to focus on the younger generations like millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the generation of the middle age is often so overlooked?
You know, it's funny you should ask that, but because I've been looking at quite a few things recently. And I've been reading papers and looking at documentation all about extremism and the counterculture, and what we're trying to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's related to the youth fascination, the youth culture that we have in today's society. You only have to look at advertising. It's incredibly rare that there is a middle-aged person. They're usually a periphery. Everything is focused on the youth. Fashion is focused on the youth. Music, everything is focused on the youth. And then on the other side, you've also got, let's look at very old people, how they are vulnerable, how we can protect them, how we can look out for them. What about the gap in the middle? It's always focused on very young and very old people and that middle generation. In fact, I actually read a paper recently that said something along the lines of, this is a phenomena that is not particularly noticeable in older people. It was referring to lifelong learning. However, middle-aged people are often reluctant to engage, full stop. And that was it. There was nothing else in the paper to explain why middle-aged people might be more reluctant to engage in lifelong learning. It was like, we know they're not interested, so we'll just skip over that. And this is what often happens in the data. They may find some data, but it's not exciting. It's not trendy. It's not fashionable. It's not of the moment, and so it just gets skipped over. And I see this time and again in the work that I'm reading.
Yeah, let's just dig deeper a little bit more into that gap, because why do you think this misconception persists? Like, let's not research the middle-aged because, with fashion and music, where does this come from?
It stems right back to the 1950s. And it's, maybe even before, but prior to then, there was no youth per se. You're either a child or you're an adult. And after the Second World War, moving into the 1950s and American youth culture, the whole idea that the young generation were the future, were the driving force of a more positive, more exciting outlook in life, good things were coming from the young, not having the baggage, if you like, from the Second World War. And so the whole focus was on encouraging young people to engage. And of course, they started having a bit more money. And so they wanted their money. And because young people tend to be much more focused on entertainment, say, than older people, probably because they have less things that they're responsible for, right? And things like that. So this started a long time ago. And it's just being proliferated. The youth are the focus of the middle-aged decision makers' decisions. So they're looking at, how can we get people to join us? How can we get people to buy our products? And they're looking at saying, we want some long-term customers. And they feel that once they've got them at 20 or 19, then they've got them for life. So anybody who's in that middle-age group is seen as already settled, sorted, not interesting. It's all this focus. I mean, you only have to look at the fashion industry. How often do you ever see models of my age? Mm-hmm. Only in very, very special editions. Clothes are designed for young people. Even if they don't actually design them for young bodies, because we know that everybody's different. But it's all focused on being young, being beautiful, being attractive, looking good on social media, looking good on Instagram. It's all about looking good. And once you start getting a few lines and wrinkles, you're no longer looking good in the eyes of the marketing media.
And thinking about the middle-aged group versus the younger generation, if you look at the demographics, all over Europe, the demographic of people in the middle age, it's quite a big group as well. So it's hard to think, let's focus on a younger generation because this group is so big. Okay, let's focus a bit more on that group as well. Like we talked a lot about the why and why we don't focus on the group, but let's focus on this group for a second. Because can you share some insights on why middle-aged individuals might be particularly vulnerable to the online extremism and conspiracy theories that the project researches as well?
There's several reasons. One of them is the education situation. So they've already been through their education, perhaps in the late 80s, early 90s. It's the Generation X or baby boomers, because this is the group we're looking at. And quite often, anecdotally, you'll hear, oh, I don't need to go back to school. I don't need to learn anything new. I already understand how the world works. I'm experienced. I'm at the top of my game. I'm very senior at work. I have this view that I know what's going on. I know the world. I understand the world. And having that perception means that they are, I suppose it's a certain level of naive arrogance in some respects. So that means that their critical thinking is not really applied to the online stuff. Interestingly, people of this generation also tend to be more interested in and believe mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So because they believe mainstream media, they believe all media. So they don't recognize that this news corporation is trustworthy, and this news organization is not, and, has a bias or a particular agenda. And so they are less able, because they haven't been trained, they haven't been educated into how that they can actually recognize the truth from a falsehood. They're not very good at researching. They're not digital natives, which is one of the phrases used for the younger generation. But they're not so old that they go, oh, I don't know if you've ever spoken to your grandma and she goes, oh, I don't understand all this internet stuff. I'm not very good online. So they are willing and open to being helped, guided and educated and supported so that they can navigate. That middle group, they think they know it all. They've got it sorted. Right. So that's one of the reasons they're vulnerable.
And do you think they're also open to the fact that when you mention you do not know it all, you need to research more, do you think they're open to the fact to learn from that? Or do you think they know it all and therefore are not open to learn anymore?
Yes. I think that there are quite a large number of people who just don't feel that they need to learn. School and book learning is something that is for the kids and that sort of thing. But I would also say that people are also vulnerable. Just then I was talking about the powerful group, the group of decision makers, the group of, policy makers. But equally, we also have a large proportion of these people who have not been successful, who have not actually seen their life go the way they would have liked, right? And these people are more susceptible to extremism and misinformation and groups that promote that. It's like embracing an echo chamber that makes them feel good, makes them feel powerful, makes them feel listened to. Because one of the other things, as I was saying, there is this very dichotomic sort of way of looking at things. And what you also have is people that they feel that they are not listened to. They're like an invisible generation. Now, this invisible generation can be extremely powerful and working under the radar, like I said. But also there's a huge number of people that feel that they're no longer valued, that they've gone as far as they can. They didn't manage to get comfortably off. They didn't buy a house. Perhaps they were in rented accommodation all their lives. Perhaps they didn't do a job that was particularly fulfilling for them. And they're feeling sort of like almost in a limbo place. They're not old, but they're no longer young. And they feel like they're losing their power, their influence. And a lot of these groups embrace those people, make them feel valued, make them feel worthwhile, make them feel like what they got to say is important again. So we've got these two sides. We've got the powerful and the powerless, both being drawn into this world, largely because of the lack of education and understanding about critical thinking and finding the truth. And truth is difficult. Truth is slippery.
Yeah. You mentioned two groups, the powerful and the powerless. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Talking about the two groups that we talked about earlier in this podcast, now looking at the different groups, meaning the younger generation versus a specific older generation, which contains the powerless, powerful. how does the digital landscape affect these middle-aged individuals, how they consume information compared to the younger generation? Obviously, you already mentioned they might not be as critical when it comes to news media sources as the younger generation, who are, as you mentioned, digital natives. Are there any other ways they consume information different than younger generations?
Well, I think that they tend to be a little bit behind the curve. So at the moment, what we've got is a huge number of people on Facebook. Now, the young people are walking away from Facebook in their droves. The older people are all still embracing the whole Facebook thing. They tend to be that little bit behind the curve. So that's one thing. They also, you want to go and join people who are like yourself. So they seek out these different groups for places which will confirm, if you like, their own ideas. It's like a confirmation bias, if you like. So they've got, they want to find places where they feel comfortable. And I think there's an awful lot as well to do with not understanding how culture has changed. So I was watching, as an example, some 1970s TV with my son, right? It was a program with lots of clips about television during that period. And there was a lot of things in there that were quite uncomfortable. There were ways of referring to women, ways of referring to people of different ethnicities. Now, this was all done in the cause of either normal speech or humour. Now, this is unacceptable. So then we get into the world of woke, right?
Yeah.
So woke used to be political correctness gone mad about 15 years ago. It's now become woke. And it's that middle-aged generation that you hear most vehemently against the idea of woke. And it's because they don't understand that this language is no longer acceptable, and they don't want to have to change the way they talk, the way they think, the way they behave with people. And that makes them angry. Right? Why should I change the way I speak? Why should I worry about people's sensitivities? Why don't they just, strengthen their backbone and deal with it? They get quite angry about it, or at least, they feel a little irritated by it. And again, so they're looking for places where those sorts of views are more acceptable. And that's where they end up going down this route. Younger people have, obviously they are more aware of the change because they're part of the change. So we've got this, that they're not looking, the older people are not looking in the same places as the younger people. They're looking in a wide range of different places and looking for confirmation that they're okay, that they're not bad people, And I think that a lot of problems with some of I've actually had experience of it, not personally, but during the Black Lives Matter protests, that it was actually my daughter, but my daughter was very, very supportive of this particular lady, and she asked her a couple of questions. Those questions were then basically, she threw these questions out. She said that you're not understanding our situation, and she cut her off. Now, I actually felt that was unreasonable. But the thing is, people feel that they are likely to be demonized by saying the wrong thing, and it makes them afraid, makes them reluctant to engage with people that have different views because they're frightened of being attacked or things like that. So I think that's another reason why you find that they're moving in different circles. They don't really meet.
Yeah, situations like that can also make you feel isolated and therefore more attracted to, as you mentioned, these kinds of groups. We already talked about some examples. I would like to talk about another example, which is the theory of deep state, which is supposed secretive and influential network within governments. I believe by some as well to manipulate government decisions.
Yes.
Can you explain how this theory in particular has resonated with middle-aged individuals and also the potential impact it has on their political beliefs and the world as they view it?
So interestingly about the World Economic Forum and other things with regards to the idea of the Great Replacement and all of these different changes in what I think you will own nothing and be happy is one of the taglines. And it does relate to people's perception of freedom to do, freedom not to do, and so on. Now, the funny thing about the World Economic Forum was a few years ago, they came out with some sort of like ideas for the future. And these ideas for the future were twisted, if you like, by some in the media, to mean that it was a bad thing, that the World Economic Forum, there was a cabal of people who wanted to restrict our freedoms, control the state, and to do these things for nefarious means to restrict eventually they wanted to reduce populations and all sorts of really quite seriously nefarious things. And the problem is that people actually believed that there was this underlying conspiracy. And once you start to think that major institutions, global institutions like the World Economic Forum or the United Nations and a lot of these big international organizations, they start to believe that they got some nefarious intent. I suppose it's partially because a lot of big corporations have been found to behave appallingly badly, particularly in developing countries. Some of the examples of some of the corruption, there was the Panama Files just a few years ago with people trying to hide their money. And then we have other people trying to influence politics. I think old George Soros gets a huge amount of blame, as does Bill Gates, and a lot of people who are setting up various ways to actually help people. But there is a worry that there is this underlying agenda, and the underlying agenda is nefarious. It is bad. I mean, it depends how far you want to go. These conspiracy theories go more and more down the rabbit hole. So you end up with lizard people and alien lasers. And there are serious people who believe this. Back to that age group. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a very good example of, she's an American politician. She is in Congress. She's been voted in. She's in a very powerful position. But she was promoting the idea, I think, during COVID, that it was being caused by space lasers from some Jewish organizations. Now, if you've got somebody in a position of power who is outwardly saying that they believe in some of these outrageous conspiracy theories, then their peers are going to go, oh, maybe there's something in it. Because she is exactly bang smack in the middle of our demographic.
And I think the example that you mentioned also shows how important it is, the research that you are doing, because is this person, is she middle-aged? Is she more, how can you say this? Is she also one of the people in the group that is vulnerable for these conspiracy theories?
Yeah, well, she's also powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
So she's a lawmaker in America. She is one of the people, she's a Republican, and she's one of these people that can vote and promote different legislations. So what we've got is a real problem. We've got people making decisions based on that, on conspiracy theories and misinformation. Now, I don't think for 1 minute that we're in quite the serious position as we are as in America, in Europe, at the moment. I would think we want to look to America and South America with their very recent election of a guy who basically wants to rip up the state completely.
You mean Milei in Argentina?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are seeing these, again, he's the right age group, isn't he? He's 52, I think, 54. He's right in that age group. And that again, is showing the power of this group. So why on earth do we not do research into their motivations, where they're getting their information from, their beliefs, why they believe what they believe? Why do they believe what they believe? Yeah. And how can we actually do something to enable these people to have actual, real information, genuine information, before they make the decisions that can affect millions of people?
Yes, Sara, I think the examples you mentioned really show the urgency of this project and why it is so important. Just to finish up, what would you like to achieve with this project?
I would like to achieve several things. Firstly is raising of awareness that this group has to be acknowledged and it has to be dealt with in a way that is specific to them. I'd just like to add one little point here. A lot of the counter work, counter narratives, and everything else that is aimed at young people. So if you've got, let me just say, right, you've got somebody who's 22 and you're showing them a counter narrative video, right? It's going to be aimed at their culture, their music, their style, their fashion, their desires. You show that video to somebody at 55 and it will not resonate. Even the music in the background won't resonate. You know, the people being shown in the video won't resonate. So this is what I really want to see. I want to see that those counter incentives and everything else are also tailored so that they are attractive to this group. So this group will then look at it and will take it in and learn from it. But at the moment, there is no targeting, there's no research, nothing. So I want to see that raised significantly. I want to see the awareness raised amongst the policymakers that their own generation needs work. Because bearing in mind all the decision makers who are deciding who gets funding for these project proposals, they're all in that generation. And they need to recognise that they are part of the problem as well as part of the solution.
So much to be talked about and so much more to be discussed. We will be back with a new episode featuring a guest who is yet to be announced. Sara, I would like to thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today and for being here with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I am Ella Buck. This is a Smidgecast, and if you want to learn more about Smidge and our work, visit smidgeproject.eu or connect with us on X at the SMIDGE Project. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider sharing it to support our mission. Thank you for listening.